military targets. At least 10 people killed in Myanmar in an airstrike by the military. Reports claim a military jet dropped 3 bombs on a village in the Sagaing region. The United Nations says the military has carried out more than 300 airstrikes in the last year. The junta is struggling to crush resistance since the coup in 2021. Donald Trump sues E. Jean Carroll for defamation. The former US president claims she falsely accused him of rape. Last month, a jury had ruled that Trump had sexually abused Carroll in the 1990s and awarded her $5 million in damages. Setback for Jair Bolsonaro in his abuse of power trial. 1 out of the 7 judges has voted to bar the former Brazilian president from running in the 2026 election. The other judges will deliver their rulings later this week. Bolsonaro faces an 8-year ban on running for public office if found guilty. Climate activists disrupt the second Ashes test at Lord's. Just Stop Oil protesters interrupt play as they ran onto the field. English wicketkeeper Johnny Bairstow carries a protester off the ground. And Bayern Munich won't renew their sponsorship with Qatar Airways. It is Germany's biggest club and it has faced criticism for its ties over alleged human rights issues, particularly over the 2022 World Cup. Tonight, we begin with the Indian stock market. It's seeing an extraordinary surge. Both Sensex and Nifty touched record highs today. The Sensex breached the 64,000 mark. The Nifty crossed the 19,000 mark. Both indices stabilized afterwards. But Indian stocks are a hot commodity. In fact, India now has the world's 4th most valuable equity market. Right behind countries like the US, China and Japan, India stands 4th. And tonight's lead is not about these daily trends. Tonight, we want to talk about the incredible bull run of Indian markets. Did you know this? Indian markets have delivered the best returns for the longest time in the world. Look at this chart. It has every key stock market benchmark of significance: the Dow Jones, Nikkei, S&P 500, FTSE 100, the Shanghai Composite, the so-called best indices in the world, operating in some of the world's biggest economies. Look at their performance. At best, they've delivered a positive return for 5 consecutive years, meaning investors have earned a profit for 5 straight years in these markets. Some markets have performed better for 6 years. That's better than most, but not the best. Guess where the Indian markets stand? Right at the top of this chart. For 8 straight years, Indian markets have been generating a positive return. For 8 years, they've delivered a profit. Indian markets are leading the world. They've performed the best in more than 2 decades. India has 2 key benchmarks, the Sensex and the Nifty. The Sensex tracks the top 30 companies in the country, the Nifty the top 50 companies. In the past 3 months, Sensex has risen by 10% and Nifty has jumped by 11%. Now let's compare this with the rest. In the last 3 months, UK's FTSE 100 rose by just 0.8%. France's CAC 40 by 2.9%. Pan-European Stocks Europe 600 index by 2.9% again. And this index tracks Europe's 600 companies, top 600 companies in 17 countries. What about the US? The S&P 500 has gained 10%. These are America's top 500 companies. Collectively, they gained about 10%. But the S&P is still almost 9% below its record high of 2022. So comparatively, India is doing better. Which brings us to the question: how is India sustaining this rally? What has propelled its markets to the top? Well, 2 key factors: steady growth and foreign investment. India's growth projections are optimistic. Investors like the Indian economy and its future prospects. The International Monetary Fund says India will grow at 5.9% this year. It believes that India will outperform all advanced economies and emerging economies. In other words, India will be the fastest growing economy in the world, and this is not a short-term projection. India will retain this tag for the next 3 years at least. That's what experts at S&P believe. They released their assessment earlier this week. So the Indian economy is growing at a fast pace and for a long duration, which is why investors are taking interest, and that's reason number 2. Global investors like India, they recognize the growth prospects, so they're putting their money into the Indian markets. Let me show you some more data. Last year, listed companies in India raised billions of dollars, almost $19 billion, and this is mainly through the buying and selling of shares. In 2022, Indian companies raised more money than the United Kingdom, Japan, Germany, and France. Now, under usual circumstances, these markets would have done better, but due to India's strong performance, it is generating better growth. So investors are turning to India. In this financial year, foreign portfolio investors have bought more Indian stocks. They've invested almost $11 billion. So we have a strong economy and more foreign investment. Now, broadly, these two reasons are driving the stock market rally, but this surge cannot be an assessment of the Indian economy. You see, stock market movements are influenced by the price of stocks and the larger market sentiment. Now, individual stocks do not represent the entire economy. Take the Nifty, for example. It's an index of the top 50 companies of India, only 50. Now, more than 37% of this index, Nifty, is made up of companies in the financial sector. So when these companies do well, the Nifty goes up. But when you talk about a country's entire economy, you must look at a wide range of metrics, a wide range of sectors like manufacturing, services, and other parts of the economy. So a rally on the stock market cannot really be an assessment of the entire economy. Having said that, India has a compelling story. Its companies are poised for growth, and the larger economic trend looks good. America, we know, is stagnated. Europe is on the brink of recession. China is struggling to get its act together. So India is the bright spot right now. The challenge is to retain this momentum. And that means staying the course on aggressive reform. And here's an example of that. What India shouldn't do: run its economy as per the whims of one leader. Xi Jinping's policies have driven China's economy into the ground. His Belt and Road Initiative led to high levels of debt. His obsession with zero COVID infected the economy. And his crackdowns on business leaders have driven away investors. The result is this: China is struggling, businesses are leaving, and Xi Jinping is trying to win them over. Today, the Chinese president made a pledge. He has promised to do right by foreign investors. Let me quote from what Xi Jinping has said. "We will continue to vigorously promote high-level opening up and better protect the rights and interests of foreign investors per the law." That's what Xi Jinping told New Zealand's Prime Minister. His name is Chris Hipkins. He's on an official visit to Beijing, and Xi told him that China is opening up again. Yesterday, the Chinese premier made a similar pitch. He tried to reassure investors. Beijing is trying very hard to reverse the slump, but it's not finding many takers, especially after today's revelations. Headlines like these: a major corruption scandal has come to light. Turns out local governments in China are cooking up their books. They're inflating their revenue through phony asset sales. A number of bogus deals have come to light. Some 70 regions are said to have falsified their records in China. They inflated their revenue by $12 billion. Let me explain how this happened. This is mainly about land deals. Now, usually regional governments sell land to private players, to property developers, who then build apartments or commercial properties. This is how it works, and this is normal practice. It's also a major source of revenue for local governments. But in recent months, China's real estate sector has hit a slump. So the demand for land has shrunk. Fewer developers are buying land from local governments. And so government revenue has taken a hit. And government officials have come under pressure because their books are not looking good. Some of them started cooking up land deals. They created phony buyers on paper. They falsified records and showed land sales on their books, which was all fake. In reality, some officials were just transferring ownership on paper, and the land in question was still in government control. It had not been sold. All they did was change the names to create an illusion of an actual purchase. Subsequently, government revenues were inflated. We are talking about fake revenues up to $12 billion. Why do you think they did this? Because Chinese officials are desperate. They face large debt obligations, and they don't have the money to repay those debts. These are government debts we are talking about, not personal debts. Local governments in China are buried under loans. At the end of last year, they owed more than $8 trillion. We've told you about this before, $8 trillion. This debt has gone out of control. Land sales would have helped, but there was no demand for land. So local governments could not raise money. In fact, land sales have been an essential source of their income. In 2021, they accounted for more than 40% of local government revenue, the sale of land. Last year, sales were down by 23%, and this market may not see a revival anytime soon. So with their back against the wall, local officials started cooking their books. And this is not limited to one or two cases. As many as 70 regions in China have inflated their revenues in this manner. Now, when stories like these come out, what message do they send to global investors? The Chinese economy is built on a foundation of deception. Their data was never reliable. Now, even their growth projections cannot be trusted. The heavy burden of debt will add to the mistrust. The phony records will diminish investor confidence. There was a time when global investors swore by China's growth story. That time is past. China is now turning into an example of what not to do. China's domestic problems seem never-ending, but that hasn't stopped it from playing the perfect host. Almost every week, a world leader is in Beijing. As we speak, the New Zealand Prime Minister is there. Soon it could be the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. They don't have a date yet, but Netanyahu has told US congressmen that he'll soon visit China. Some of them were in Jerusalem, and that's when he dropped the news. And now it's making headlines. Although this won't be his first visit to China. He's been there before, thrice. So this will be his fourth time in China as Prime Minister, but it's feeding a lot of chatter because A, America is Israel's biggest and closest partner. America and China are at odds, and Netanyahu's visit at a time like this sends a message. And B, he's not been to the US in this term yet, but he's talking about going to China, which makes you wonder what's going on between Netanyahu and Biden. You see, Benjamin Netanyahu was elected as Prime Minister last December. It's almost been 6 months, 180 days, but he's got no invite from the White House. These two countries, the US and Israel, are as close as they get. Israel is America's biggest ally in West Asia. America gives Israel billions in aid every year. It's been called an unbreakable bond. But it seems the Biden administration is not feeling it. They're keeping Netanyahu at an arm's length, not sending him an invite, and disagreeing with him publicly. This happened in March over Netanyahu's proposed judicial overhaul. A deeply unpopular move. It triggered the biggest protest in Israeli history. They were close to a civil war then. Among the protesters was the US president. He said Netanyahu should drop the plan.
They cannot continue down this road. And I've sort of made that clear. Hopefully the Prime Minister will act in a way that he can try to work out some genuine compromise, but that remains to be seen.
Now that's a public rebuke of a close ally. Obviously, it did not go down well with Israel, but Netanyahu played it down. He said friends sometimes do have disagreements. Listen to this.
You know, Israel and the United States have had their occasional differences, but I want to assure you that the alliance between the world's greatest democracy and a strong, proud, and independent democracy, Israel, in the heart of the Middle East, is unshakable. Nothing can change that.
You heard that. An unshakable alliance, he said. But are Israel and the US still as tight as they claim? Netanyahu is not new to politics. He's been Prime Minister for 15 years, Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister, in fact. He's dealt with multiple US presidents. He's navigated changing relations and equations. He did not share a great rapport with Barack Obama, and now he's getting a snub from Joe Biden. So he's going for the second best option, it seems, and that is China. He knows that US-China relations are at an all-time low. He also knows that his visit to China will make the Americans sit up. But that may not be his only purpose. He may want to achieve more than sending a message to Washington, D.C. Which brings us to the China-Israel relationship. First, the numbers. Trade was at more than $9 billion in the year 2012. By 2022, it almost touched $22 billion. China has been investing in Israel despite the roadblocks from the US, and there have been roadblocks. So both sides have been going slow. Plus, China's historic support to Palestine has posed problems for Tel Aviv. And yet, Netanyahu has persisted. In 2017, he called the Israel-China relationship a marriage made in heaven. Well, he said this about India too, so it makes you wonder if this is his favorite phrase. In his personal life, he's been married thrice, so do your math. Anyway, the question now is he going to China to consummate this marriage? He's an astute politician. The world around him is changing very fast. And China is playing a big role in that. Recently, Beijing brokered a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. For Israel, Iran is a sworn enemy and Saudi Arabia a coveted partner. Israel also wants to normalize ties with the Saudis. Some help from the Chinese would be welcome. So that's one reason. The second reason could be the Israel-Palestinian conflict, the holy grail of foreign policy, as it were. Every US president has tried and failed. Now China wants to mediate. This month, China hosted Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. So is it now Netanyahu's turn? Will he engage with China on the question of Palestine? Honestly, we don't know yet, but either way, China may be the winner here. The Israeli leader's visit sends a message, a strong message to the US. It also marks another interesting turn in the politics of West Asia. We'll be tracking it for you. We're still tracking the fallout of the Russian rebellion. Quite a story, that one. This weekend, Putin was on the edge of his seat. His country was dealing with a mutiny. And today it was NATO's turn to be on the edge. Its eastern flank is worried. That's because of the presence of this man, Wagner chief Prigozhin. He's now in Belarus, and so are some of his Wagner forces. You see, when Prigozhin ended his mutiny, he brokered a deal with the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko. He was promised a safe passage out of Russia and into Belarus, so that's where he is now. And his new location is making the NATO uneasy. To understand why, you must look at a map of Eastern Europe. You can see Belarus there. To its north are Lithuania and Latvia. And on the west, there's Poland. All of these are NATO states, and they're worried about Wagner on their borders.
Last Saturday, we all have seen the mutiny of the Wagner Group in Russia. If Wagner deploys its serial killers in Belarus, all neighboring countries face even greater danger of instability. Under such circumstances, deterrence and forward defense is a top priority.
We heard those questions of ladies and gentlemen here about the Wagner's group in Belarus and the presence of Mr. Prigozhin in Belarus. In my opinion, this is really serious and very concerning problem, and we have discussed, and we have to make some decisions, very strong decision. It, in my opinion, requires a very, very, very tough answer of NATO.
Those were the presidents of Lithuania and Poland. They say Wagner troops in Belarus spell trouble. They're worried about instability spilling over. So what is the NATO doing about it? Well, nothing yet. But it says its guards are up.
I think it's too early to make any final conclusions on the long-term consequences, including for NATO. But what we can say is that we are, of course, closely monitoring the developments, and we have already increased our readiness, our preparedness, and our military presence in the eastern part of the alliance.
That was the NATO Secretary General. He says the alliance is ready for any threat. But what is the threat? And how serious? Yes, the Wagner chief is in Belarus with some of his fighters, but as of now, they're most likely figuring out their own future, not planning an attack on Eastern Europe. You see, there's a lot of uncertainty, question marks on what will become of this mercenary group. They challenged Putin's power. Will he forget and forgive? Also, what happens to Wagner's global operations? This is a private army, as you would know. It has long been seen as an extension of Moscow's influence. It has operations in multiple countries: Syria, Libya, Mali, Central African Republic, Sudan. So clearly a large presence in West Asia and Africa, a presence that depends heavily on Moscow. Wagner benefits from the Russian government. Will they continue to work and fight for Russia? Will they continue their operations in all of these countries? As of now, the Kremlin says it will be business as usual. But for how long? How can a private army that challenged Russia continue to fight for Russia and be based in Belarus? I guess all of them are still trying to figure out how this works and what is the future. Wagner and Russia both need each other. Wagner depends on Moscow for arms and aid, and Moscow depends on it for influence, to keep a grip on troubled regions and to counter Western influence. So it's a fragile but important relationship. Putin cannot send Russian soldiers to Africa. He cannot replace the Wagner troops, at least not immediately. So for the foreseeable future, the troops may remain in West Asia and Africa. But does that mean that Prigozhin is forgiven? Before we try to answer that, listen to this soundbite. This is from an old interview of President Vladimir Putin.
Вы умеете прощать? Да. Но не все. А что невозможно простить? Предательство.
So the anchor asks Putin, what is the one thing that he cannot forgive? And the Russian president says, betrayal. Prigozhin's mutiny was a betrayal by one of his closest aides. So it's unlikely to be forgotten or forgiven. A counterattack, a crackdown may not come today or tomorrow, but it will come. You've not heard the last of this. Vantage continues after a short break.
Those girls to two-finger test,
yes,
which was obnoxious, and that was a subject of official communication by the governor. But this is all not taken notice of, and these are all supposed to be governments which are running on some high principles of democracy, freedom, and Dravidian model. I think what is happening.
But their point of view, Professor Gurumurthy, is,
sir,
Gurumurthy sir, their point of view, you've said that it is.
Now let's look at the other side of the world, East Asia, far away from the war in Europe, but suffering its fallout. The world is divided. Clear military camps and alliances have taken shape. NATO is fighting Russia. The US and China are in a Cold War, and East Asia is emerging as their battlefront. Every day brings new headlines featuring warships, military stunts, and missiles. The latest one comes from Taiwan. 2 Russian warships sailed close to Taiwan, not Chinese, Russian warships. This was late last night. Taiwan's defense ministry was on high alert. They said, and I quote, "The National Army used joint intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance methods to grasp the dynamics of the Russian ships throughout the process and dispatched mission aircraft, ships and shore-mounted missile systems to closely monitor the response." We don't know just how close the Russian warships got to Taiwan. The ministry did not specify the distance, but they were close enough for Taiwan to put up its guard. And you must understand, Taiwan is no stranger to territorial incursions. Their neighbor is China, after all. And Beijing's aggression is almost routine. Let me show you something. This is the Taiwan Defense Ministry's Twitter feed. Every day it reports incursions by the Chinese Air Force and Navy. And despite this daily pressure, the Russian vessels found special mention because they escalate the already tense situation in East Asia. To understand this further, we need to zoom out, to look at the region as a whole. You have the no-limits partners on one side, that is Russia and China. They call themselves each other no-limits partners. They're joined by their old friend North Korea, a country that keeps testing ballistic missiles. It wants to develop nuclear weapons. It wants to threaten South Korea and Japan. And that's what it does. So this is one camp, China, Russia, North Korea. The other camp has some unlikely partners, Japan and South Korea. They've had a difficult history, but they're trying to forget it to secure their future. These 2 countries are under the American security umbrella. Washington has promised to defend Seoul and Tokyo. And together they keep holding military drills to unsettle Pyongyang. In response, North Korea fires even more missiles. And this is a dangerous spiral, a continuous cycle of showmanship. Here's the latest in that one. A US submarine is visiting South Korea. Not just any submarine, it's an Ohio-class warship, the largest class of submarines ever built for the US Navy, nuclear-powered and nuclear-armed. So nuclear weapons are being ferried about in East Asia, and of course, the US also promises to protect Taiwan from the Chinese, from Chinese military action. So add Taipei to their camp, and what do you get? A powder keg, ready to explode at the slightest provocation, and that's exactly what the Russian warship stunt near Taiwan is being called, a provocation. As if that wasn't enough, Russia seems to be doubling down. After all this drama, Moscow released footage of a military drill in the Sea of Japan. Russia's defense ministry chose this day, today, to release this video. It shows a corvette ship shooting down an anti-ship missile. The timing is suspect, and the build-up is dangerous. China versus Taiwan, North Korea versus South Korea and Japan, Russia versus American allies, America versus the Asian mainland. It's a mess, and a dangerous one at that. All sides need to do their bit to diffuse the tensions, because if they don't, one wrong move can send the world into another catastrophic war. Paris is on fire. People have taken to the streets once again. This time it's about a murder. The murder of a 17-year-old by a police officer. A police officer killed the boy for refusing to stop his car. This is over traffic violations, apparently. A video of the incident has gone viral. It has enraged the French public. And that public anger has led to riots. Critics say this is becoming a trend, that there's been a rise in extrajudicial executions by the French police. In India, we call them encounters. There were 13 such incidents last year over traffic violations alone. Yesterday's killing was the second one this year, and the French people seem to have had enough. Here's a report.
This was Paris last night. Violent protests broke out. Demonstrators armed with fireworks clashed with the police. The police responded with tear gas. Protesters set about 40 cars on fire. About 31 people were arrested. This chaos is the result of a traffic stop gone wrong. What do you expect to happen when you break a traffic law? Like running a red light or driving on a pavement. These things are illegal. You might expect to get pulled over by the police, most likely pay a fine. If the violation was grave, maybe end up in police custody. But would you think you might get shot and killed? Not for a traffic violation, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to a 17-year-old in Paris yesterday. A French police officer asked the teenager to stop his car. He tried to flee and ended up shot dead. This is a video of the incident which has gone viral. The footage is disturbing, but if you can look closely, the boy tries to drive off. He's shot as he speeds away. The car crashes up ahead after the teenager is shot. After this, he was rushed to the hospital, but he was declared dead soon after. What the teenager did was clearly illegal. There's no doubt about it. But does that justify his death at the hands of a police officer? Many French citizens don't think so. There's been an outpouring of support on social media. The French football team captain, Kylian Mbappe, put up this post. Actor Omar Sy tweeted this.
First of all, I would like to express the emotion of the entire nation at what has happened and at the death of young Nehel, and to tell his family of our solidarity and the affection of the nation. We have a teenager who has been killed. It's inexplicable, unforgivable. These are words of affection, shared sorrow, and support for his family and loved ones.
Macron called the incident inexplicable and unforgivable. The officer has been taken into custody. A case has been filed against him for voluntary manslaughter. He's under investigation. You may ask why France is still furious if the police officer is being punished. It's partly because of what happened after the killing. We showed you the footage from the incident. The police were clearly standing beside the car. But in the report they filed after the killing, the police allegedly lied. They said they killed the teenager because he tried to run them over.
This is an extremely serious matter. This video clearly shows that a police officer shot a young man in a cold-blooded way. The police officer who fired the shot is currently in police custody. We therefore hope that things will continue in a calm manner. But we will of course be vigilant, because this is a case of voluntary manslaughter. and there was no self-defense.
The family will file an additional complaint for false testimony. The other officer involved will be charged with complicity in the killing. And in these cases, the wheels of justice need to turn fast. Because the people of France are furious. More protests are expected today. The French government keeps appealing for calm, but the only way to ensure peace is for justice to prevail.
Which brings us to Sweden. It has approved a protest in its capital, Stockholm. Sounds simple, right? But this is not just any other protest. Sweden has given permission to demonstrators to burn the Quran, the holy book of Islam. The protest will be outside Stockholm's main mosque, and it will take place on Eid al-Adha, one of the holiest days in the Islamic calendar. So Sweden is clearly playing with fire. But why has it allowed this? The order came from a Swedish court. In fact, let me quote from what the court said. The security risks and consequences that the authorities can see connected to a Quran burning are not of such a nature that according to the current law, they give grounds for a decision to reject a request for a general gathering. Basically, the security risks weren't high enough to reject the request, so the court allowed it. I know it sounds problematic, but Sweden rarely bans protests. In fact, this isn't the first book-burning protest. It's happened before. Protesters have burned the Quran in Sweden before. They were led by this man, Rasmus Paludan. And in fact, he has made quite a name with his Quran-burning protests. But this protest is not being led by him. Reports say an Iraqi refugee called for it. He wants to ban the Quran, hence the protest. Now, Sweden may not stop this protest, but it will have to deal with the consequences. And this most certainly will not go down well with the Muslim world. More importantly, with Turkey. You see, Sweden wants to join the NATO, and it's adamant about it. It's really keen to join the NATO. And the only roadblock it has is Turkey. They're opposing the membership. What explains this bad blood? Well, another Quran-burning protest. Well, this happened in January. The Quran was burnt in Sweden. It was done in front of the Turkish embassy. And this did not go down well with Ankara. It slammed the protests. It cancelled the Swedish defense minister's visit. And since that day, Turkey has held it against Sweden. And now there's going to be another protest like this that the Swedish authorities have allowed. Will Turkey turn a blind eye to this one? By the way, this is not the first Quran burning in Europe. And by the looks of it, it may not be the last. In the last 20 years, Europe has witnessed massive migration. Millions flocked to the continent. Most of them came from West Asia and Africa. Some of it was legal, a lot of it was illegal. Europe has tightened its borders now. But these migrants who came over the years still live in Europe. They're part of the European society. But when it comes to values, there is a divide, and a stark one at that. Europe says it believes in free speech. But its critics say it's confusing incitement with freedom of speech. There are many examples of this, including the infamous Charlie Hebdo cartoon, a very controversial one. The French magazine published a series of satirical cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. They targeted other religions too, but this is the one that sparked massive outrage. There was an attack on the magazine office. 12 people were killed in that attack. Then there were Quran burning events. They happened in Denmark and now in Sweden. Europe defends all of it as freedom of speech. Its critics say it's not free speech really, it's just incitement, and that Europe is being Islamophobic. About 20 million Muslims live in the European Union. That's a sizable population. Most of them believe they're not integrated into the society. That's what experts also say. But these people feel marginalized. In some cases, they also come under attacks that call for further crackdown. Europeans believe that migrants are threatening their social fabric, so they're calling for stricter borders. But this crisis, the one that's playing out now, is borderless. European society is more divided than ever before. It is dealing with growing extremism on both sides, and Europe must address it before it boils over. Before I begin my next story, let me ask you a weighted question. Have you ever been concerned about your weight gain? Have you been conscious about being large of thigh and round of belly? Have you ever dreamed of a drug that could render you slender? According to drug makers, your wait is over because we are living in a weight loss revolution which has taken another dramatic turn. Eli Lilly, a drug maker, has developed an experimental weight loss shot, an injection to help you lose weight. It's being hailed as the strongest weight loss treatment yet. It works a lot like other similar drugs. It tinkers with the body's hormones that control appetite. And the result? Obese patients shed about 24% of their body weight after 48 weeks. Some 26 kilos of weight loss in almost a year. Honestly, these results are mind-blowing, much higher than any other anti-obesity medication. And that's saying something because, as you may know, there are numerous players in the weight loss game like Novo Nordisk, Pfizer, AstraZeneca and Amgen. From jabs to pills, they offer a crop of solutions. And they may differ in their response, but they all promise one thing, a slimmer world. But here's the skinny. Over the past decade, these treatments have offered very little benefit and too many side effects. But now Lilly's newest drug has set the bar much higher by showing that weight can be dramatically cut down by a simple injection. It is already one of the most valuable drug makers in the world, and after the news of this drug, its shares have risen sharply, which only goes on to show that Lilly may take the lead in the weight loss market, a market which is predicted to reach $150 billion within the next decade. So weight loss will be rivaling cancer treatments. Tells you something about our world. Drugs that help you shed weight come with a heavy price tag. Every month, an average user must shell out more than $900 for these drugs. Very expensive for a medicine, unaffordable for many. Yet the demand continues to surge because people see value in these drugs. For some, they're the weapon of choice in the battle of beauty. For others, they can be a lifesaver. Today, 38% of the world population is overweight or obese. That's about 2.5 billion people, 2.6 billion people. In 12 years' time, this will increase to 51%. That's more than 4 billion people. And obesity is harmful to health, no two ways about it. It can cause diabetes and heart disease. It does sound morbid, right? So people continue to embrace this drug-fueled anti-obesity revolution and enter a new territory where metabolism is manipulated. And apart from the cost, there's also a metaphorical price to pay. Most of these drugs, including Lilly's shot, come with a range of similar side effects like nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, constipation. And these issues only get worse as the dosage increases. Some even experience skin tingling and increased heart rate. And all of these side effects are known. Yet these drugs continue to fuel a frenzy among patients. They're causing a gold rush within the pharma industry, which for decades has been seeking its holy grail, a drug that can safely help people shed pounds. The fact is, scientists are still learning how to harness the link between our brain and our gut. So weight loss drugs are going through a series of trials, jumping through the hoops to prove their worth. And so is Lilly's supposed miracle shot. Its efficacy and safety still needs to be confirmed in a larger trial. And further study in the field is required across the board. But you don't need to see the results to catch the excitement in the air, really, because those who are desperate to shed weight are willing to shed hundreds of dollars for any new potentially successful anti-obesity drug, even if it comes with risks. After all, there's a price for everything. And for all the talk about body positivity and embracing yourself for who you really are, the desire for weight loss continues to drive a very big market. If you could go back in time, what would you do differently? That's a question that over 51 million people face today. We're talking about the people of South Korea because, believe it or not, they have become younger overnight. At least according to a new law in their country, it says South Korea will now adopt the International Age System, a way to calculate age which is used by most of the world. Earlier, Koreans used other systems to calculate what they call the Korean age. Now that has been scrapped. And this has ended years of debate. Our next report tells you more.
South Koreans woke up yesterday to find themselves a year or two younger because the East Asian country's government has passed a new law. It has adopted the International Age System, ditching its traditional system to count age. And for most, this is good news.
According to traditional Korean age system, I'm supposed to be 30 next year. But with this new age system, I became 2 years younger. It's just great to feel like you're getting younger, and I feel a bit of distance from becoming 30. I'm so happy that I can celebrate this year's birthday once again in younger age.
I'm going to study abroad in the UK, so I think it's less confusing that I don't need to explain my Korean age anymore. I can just say my international age in other countries, since we have adopted the international age system.
We used to use our international age in official documents, so I don't think this will be a big change. But my friends and I are excited about becoming 2 years younger.
South Korea has 3 different age systems. Yes, 3. The first, as we mentioned earlier, is called international age. It refers to the number of years since a person was born. So this count starts at 0. It's what most of the world uses. But for South Koreans, it's usually used in formal settings, like on legal documents. And matters get complicated in informal settings, where people often share their Korean age. This system has its roots in China, where babies are considered a year old on the day they're born, and a year is added every January 1st. In simple terms, Korean age makes people a year or 2 older than their international age. But this isn't all. South Koreans also have a calendar age, which is a remix featuring both international and Korean age. Here, babies are 0 years old on the day they're born, but a year is added to their age every January 1st. Let us give you an example. Take the Korean star Psy, singer of Gangnam Style. He was born on December 31st in 1977. By international age, he's 45. By calendar age, 46. And by Korean age, he's 47 years old. Sounds confusing, right? That's because it is. Also, increasingly unpopular. People have to switch between different age systems regularly. The confusion it spurs has caused disputes in the country. People have had to pay unnecessary social costs due to a mixed use of age standards. The government held a poll recently. 86.2% of respondents said that they want to use the international age system. But it's not just the people. The government too had been in favor of this move for a while now. It's been a major pledge by President Yoon Suk-yeol.
We expect that legal disputes, complaints and social confusion that have been caused over how to calculate ages will be greatly reduced.
Even with the new standardization, the old systems will still be used in some circumstances, like elementary school admissions or alcohol and tobacco consumption, which are based on the year someone is born in, regardless of month. So, while the system may still be a tad bit confusing, it is definitely simplified by leaps and bounds with this law. And for South Koreans, this was much awaited. After all, sometimes age is more than just a number.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Fighting continues in Sudan despite the paramilitary's truce call. The war between rival military factions has now entered its 11th week. A 33-foot-long whale was freed from a net. This happened off Australia's Gold Coast. France celebrated its popular annual wine festival by replacing fireworks with a drone show. And finally, what makes the 28th of June significant? We're taking you back in history to the year 1919, when the Treaty of Versailles was signed in France between Germany and the Allied nations to mark the end of World War I. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر دي غنايمهم الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الليلة السبت ارفع راسك فوق Back it up.
Try to hit.
which is housed there and worshipped by people from all over the world, it is being brought to such a disrepute. It is unbecoming of a government of any kind. I don't expect even a Mughal government would have done what the DMK government is doing. At least they will have some shame that they are doing this to the Hindus. But these people can do anything against the Hindus because they also say they are Hindus.
Is this specifically against Hindus, or is it against the Dikshitars who are Brahmins?
It is against the Hindu tradition, Hindu values, and it is administered by Brahmins. This temple is administered, they are not only Brahmins, they are a very small section of the Brahmins.
So what is the way forward?
Part of even the larger Brahmin community.
What is the way forward? Because
if
there is no uproar among the Hindu community,
they have to seek recourse only under law.
But
there is no other way. Otherwise, they are not the people who will go to the streets.
But Professor Gurumurthy, temples are the only ones that come under state control as religious institutions. Hindus are majority population in this country.
No, temples do not come under the government. The temples are supposed to be managed well, and the responsibility is of the government to ensure. But they cannot control or take over the temple. They have done it repeatedly. There are temples which are for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, only under the political system. Whereas it should be only an intervention. So it has now become, they have established a government department for this. Not to supervise, but to manage, to own, to control. The entire HR&C department is against the scheme of the constitution.
But how do you dismantle this? Because this is not unique only to Tamil Nadu. It is a pan-India issue.
No. In all over India it is there, but there is a system. Even in a communist state like Kerala, there is a system of governance. In Andhra, there is a system of governance. There is participation of the people. Because the DMK movement, they said, Sriranganathanayum, Thillai Nadarajanayum, Beerangi Vaithu Thagarthum Naal Ennalo. When
A very good evening. You're watching Breaking on News 18. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Let's dive into the segment with latest breaking news coming in from Chhattisgarh. All right, we are learning that T.S. Singh Deo has been made Deputy CM of Chhattisgarh. This is the breaking input that we are bringing to you. The Congress has appointed T.S. Singh as the Deputy Chief Minister in Chhattisgarh. Remember, he continues to be at loggerheads with the Chhattisgarh Chief Minister Bhupesh Baghel. Let's also bring you a reaction of T.S. Singh.
गहरा आभार व्यक्त करना चाहूँगा। कांग्रेस प्रेसिडेंट आदरणीय मल्लिकार्जुन खड़गे जी ने एक जवाबदारी दी है। मैंने हमेशा यही जाना है, माना है और समझा है कि सरगुजा के अंचल में पला बढ़ा, छत्तीसगढ़ ने अपनाया, बहुत स्नेह दिया। कांग्रेस पार्टी ने काम करने का मौका दिया और लीडरशिप ने जवाबदारियां दी। तो जीवन में यही है कि जो जवाबदारियां मिले हैं उनको अच्छी तरीके से अपनी क्षमता के अनुरूप निभाओ।